Surprise, a very full agenda today, so don't want to waste even a minute. So we are kicking off our 5th West Seattle Bridge Community Task Force meeting. And just to remind folks, we are starting right now at noon, and this meeting will conclude at 2:30. We are going to go into a breakout session at the end of today's meeting, and we will come back to that about the technical know-how for how we aim to do that with sort of plan A, and then how people can get into breakout groups via plan B. But just to acknowledge right now up front, everyone should have received a calendar invite to their breakout group. If you did not, that would be a great thing to include in the chat now, so we have time to troubleshoot between now and breakout session time. And then we will have technical assistance in real time to help for those who are reasonably struggling because this technology leaves perhaps a bit to be desired. So with that, I will now turn it over to our co-chairs to get us started. And Mayor Nichols is going to start that off with an overview of the agenda.
Well, actually, I think Paulina.
Very quickly, that would be me.
Apologies.
Can you guys hear me? Yeah, okay. Welcome everyone to our community number 5 now for the West Seattle Bridge Community Task Force. Excited to see you all, and thank you for your commitment and all for your feedback that we have gotten, emails. I truly appreciate. Between Greg and I, we look very carefully to all your recommendations, to your feedback through the meetings, etc. So I really want to thank you for that. So Greg will be going into the agenda of the overview, following on some of the recommendations as well. But I do want to allow for Seattle City Council member Tammy Morales is joining us for the first time. I hope she's already joined into the call. But we're really excited to have you as you represent your district. Are you here and that you would like to introduce yourself?
I'm not seeing the council member joining us yet, and I know that there are budget committee meetings today, so perhaps we'll have to bring her in ad hoc, but we'll watch the panelist list and coordinate as soon as she's able to join.
Great.
Thank you for noting that, Michael. Is there anyone else that is joining for the first time this committee representing someone that we need to introduce? I noticed for Commissioner Fred Philman is here, but he was introduced last time. Anyone else?
Okay. Good. Well, welcome everybody, and thank you again for your time and effort on this this important issue. We've got a full agenda, as Michael mentioned. We're going to get another update on the bridge. There have been some very visible changes that I think you'll be interested in hearing about. We're going to hear from Metro Transit, and obviously in the midterm and long-term, Metro is going to be an important part of moving people who formerly took the bridge. Although in the short run with the virus, it's awkward and difficult to see how that role is going to be in the short term. We're going to do something very important in terms of beginning to jump into the cost-benefit analysis. Now, that doesn't sound very exciting, but that's the basis of how the decision will be made, repair versus immediate replacement. What is it going to cost? How much utility will we get out of a repair bridge? How many lanes? How long a period of time can we count on? So that will be a very important introduction to that subject. That's one that we'll carry through in future meetings as we approach the repair or replace decision. We're going to break out into the 2 groups. We thought that was very successful 2 weeks ago, and that was feedback that we got, that people felt that was very useful for them and for us. So we're going to break out again for about a half an hour to get your reaction to what you've heard today and conversation around the larger issues as well. So that's it. Let's jump into it. Paulina, back to you.
I have just requested that as we had adopted these working group agreements, it's just a reminder for all of us to have a successful group participation, that this is a living document and it's important that we all remembered of what we agree upon as a group. So I just have asked to have a 1-second reminder. And after these, I'm just going to move to the next, which will be the meeting options that we have. So as you know, moving forward, there is a lot to discuss and a lot to absorb. So there is some meeting options that we have been exploring, also following in your recommendations. Today, thank you for being so flexible and adding 30 minutes to the meeting so we can have our breakout discussions, which are super full of information and is helping us know each other better, but also bring more of your points of view to this discussion in a meaningful way. So as we are receiving more substantial amount of context coming our way, we want to see what would be the best options for us, like either having an option that would allow for for longer meetings, adding 30 to 60 minutes additional. And we're very conscious that for some of us, as the middle of the day, we have the jobs that we have, and then locking like a 3-hour meeting in between the day is very hard. Or also having an option where more meetings are going to be allowed. So we will have adding time to the August meetings that we have agreed. So we will be polling some task force members for that. And then we have also thought about additional optional times. So that would be Q&A that we could incorporate some more discussion with the staff as well as task force members. And we heard a lot about in our discussions, breakout sessions last time, of the importance of dividing the groups and whatever makes more sense to us, if it's either on the Reconnect West Seattle or on the bridge replacement piece. So we have also thought about having some subgroups that would allow for more participation according to what makes more sense to each of you. So these are the options that we have, and hopefully, we will be sending some more polling information, but just we wanted to acknowledge that this is a lot of time you're giving us, but we want to make it so it makes sense to you all. Greg?
All right. So with that, we're going to go to Heather, and I'm supposed to introduce Heather. Heather has addressed us before and needs no introduction. So Heather, take it away.
Thank you very much, Mayor Nichols. I appreciate your faith. So we have a number of things that I want to cover briefly. First, the emergency declaration. We thank Mayor Durkin so much for helping us with an emergency declaration, and we are continuing to work with the state on the right timing for the state to join us in that emergency declaration. I also want to talk a little bit more about the First Avenue South Bridge grid deck replacement, the Seattle Transportation Benefit District, a little information about the health of the low bridge, as well as some access policy recommendations. And then I want to talk a little bit about the Reconnect West Seattle updates. So let us move on to the next slide. So I didn't know this, but apparently it's called the Duwamish River Bridge. I think many of us refer to it as the First Avenue South Bridge. So perhaps you have heard that they are replacing those metal grates that are on the northbound bridge. The work started last week. We coordinated very carefully with WashDOT to ensure that A, the work would happen at night when there would be the least impact. And also, fortunately, we were able to open up the lower bridge so that during the time when that First Avenue South Bridge is closed for those very important repairs, you're able to use the lower bridge. This work is going to be going on through the middle of August, and through September or early October. I think we can all agree that any kind of bridge maintenance work, especially across the Duwamish, is extremely important. And so even though the timing doesn't line up great with the problems with our high bridge, hopefully we can appreciate why it's so important for them for WashDOT to keep that First Avenue South Bridge in a state of good repair. Next slide, please. This is a whole lot of detail about the Seattle Transportation Benefit District legislation that the City Council is considering right now. If they pass it through, it'll be a November ballot proposition. You may know that our current Seattle Transportation Benefit District measure is set to expire at the end of this year. The council is considering some changes to the legislation that Mayor Durkin sent, mostly related to the term, whether it will be a 4 or a 6-year transportation benefit district term, and how much the district would charge. Most of that is going to be sales tax, but depending on what kind of response we get from the state Supreme Court, we may have a vehicle license fee there. If you have more questions about that, please put them in the chat, and Bill Laborde, who is our resident expert on this topic, can answer that. One of the important things is that there is a lot of, next slide, please, sorry. There's a lot of support within this STBD proposal that would address some acute mobility needs that we have in West Seattle and the Duwamish Valley. They would it would support more surface transit so that we can achieve that 30% transit mode split that we are after, and also remembering that all of that traffic that is funneling through South Park and Georgetown is an equity issue. So we want to make sure that we provide people lots of options so that if you're able to avoid using your car through South Park and Georgetown, you do so. Next slide, please. So just want to mention that the low bridge is still under constant monitoring. I know we've spoken about this, but you may know that in updating the load rating for the low bridge, as was required when federal standards were improved, we identified how that structure has some limitations related to those new standards. This is not analogous to the high bridge. This is not a situation where we noticed some cracks and then they started growing exponentially. This was part of a normal maintenance update process. So as we learned about how the low bridge is not living up to those new standards, we have taken some administrative steps to protect the bridge. The first is lowering the speed limit to 25 miles an hour. In addition, we're adding weight restrictions for the very largest trucks. They're called Overlegal 2, and we are fast tracking some strengthening measures that are going to help that. This situation is not analogous to the high bridge. There is not a concern right now that we have any kind of failure future for the low bridge. Next slide, please. This is one of those slides that we really want your input on the chat, so please do share. The low bridge, you may recall that at our last meeting, we included or we expanded access to the low bridge. We're still having emergency vehicle response be at the very top of the priority. STBD enforces those low bridge restrictions at peak periods. We expanded on June 25th access to everyone between 6 p.m. and 5 a.m., as well as school buses. And we also had the potential for others with more discussion and data sharing, proximate maritime users, and employer shuttles. Our analysis indicates that an additional 160 vehicles can use the low bridge at any one time. And because this is the way traffic modeling works, we have to assume that those 160 vehicles are going to show up at any given time. So we have to plan for all of them to show up at once. Next slide, please. So here is our most recent proposal that we have arrived at in partnership with our friends at the Office of Economic Development and the Port of Seattle. So we're going to expand low bridge access to 75 maritime and industrial users that have jobs that are proximate to Harbor Island. I want to make clear that this is not for commute purposes. This is for during the day on the job access. We're also expanding to 22 employer sponsored shuttles, 8 van pools of essential workers, and a total of 113 ILWU workers. We're going to print up placards. Yeah.
I think there's a question from Councilmember Herbold regarding
Okay.
enforcement.
Okay, Councilmember Herbold.
I'm sorry, and my question was on the previous slide, but you might cover it more in depth later. I have been talking to Chief Best about their really important work doing enforcement during peak hours, and the fact that that has a lot of impacts on their capacity to do enforcement in other parts of the city. They're happy to do it, but they are also very anxious to have more information about when we might shift to automated camera enforcement.
Yeah, so that is actually on this slide. So let me just say that we are going to distribute those placards directly to folks who are allowed to use them. In order to use that low bridge, the vehicles must display those new placards. And this policy and access is going to be reevaluated in the fall, right before automated enforcement starts. We are working very carefully with STBD, and I know with everything that's going on with them, it's not surprising that that didn't make it quite to Chief Best. Our intention is to have automated enforcement start up this fall, perhaps in September. Once automated enforcement starts, all use of the low bridge is going to be tied to license plate numbers. So anybody who's not driving a bus or a freight vehicle or an emergency response vehicle is going to have provided their license plate number. Otherwise, they'll get a ticket. Next slide, please.
Thank you.
If there, I just want to alert everyone that I'm not monitoring the chat when I'm presenting. So if there are questions, I hope that
Heather, I'll flag
You're-
one from Dan here. It says,
Okay.
why so many for ILWU? Can they use a shuttle?
That's a real good question, Dan. And we are moving our friends from ILWU slowly in the direction where I think, would like them to go. This is a really big change for them, and a lot of their contract-related guarantees depend on this kind of access. They have expressed some reticence about providing us with license plate numbers, and so the option for them, if they don't want to provide license plate numbers, is to go with a shuttle, and that could change things. That could change things quite a bit. Okay. Yeah, Dan, I know it is a big change for all of us. You can maybe come to one of these meetings, and you will feel my my struggle. Okay, Reconnect West Seattle. So here's some updates. We're thrilled that the Mobility Action Plan surveys have received more than 10,000 responses. This is an incredible number. I don't know if any of you guys have done surveys like this, but this is an amazing response rate. We've also had more than 1,000 responses to the neighborhood prioritization ballots. The best response has been from the Southwest Seattle communities. Both Georgetown and South Park have a number of paper ballots outstanding, and so those come in a little bit more slowly. So we know we're going to get more responses there. I also would like to invite any of our task force members who have connections in Georgetown or South Park, or are members of groups in Georgetown or South Park, to please distribute information about those surveys. It's tremendously important that we get feedback, as well as with SOTO. Next week we have some office hours meetings and reminders going out. Just a reminder that those surveys are all going to close on July 31st. As much as we'd like to give the community infinite time to respond to those surveys, we do need to actually make the improvements, and so at a certain point we have to cut that off. Just for your planning, we intend to come to the community task force on the 5th and on the 19th to review results and have you all provide input to us. In early September, we will have a plan that we will start to implement. Next slide, please.
Heather, very quickly, we have a hand raised from Marcy Carpenter and Councilmember Herbold. We see your question, and I think that is one best addressed in writing, if that's okay with you. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, Heather.
Hi, Marcy.
And I'm having difficulty with chat and Q&A. So just FYI for everyone, I'm just going to be raising my hand when I have a question. Okay. What are traffic counts on the lower bridge in the overnight now that we're allowing more people on the bridge?
Oh, wow, that's a really good question. I don't have that number off the top of my head. Does anybody, Colin, are you here? Do you know? Does anybody know that number? I do know that 450 is the number on the bridge at which we start to impact emergency vehicles. So I imagine that the number is still well below that at night. We'll, if no one has it now, we'll get that number to the whole task force.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Okay, are there any more questions on this one?
We have one more question, Megan. Maybe perhaps you want to answer this, but Deb's asking for clarification on what does it mean office hours next week?
Oh yeah, definitely, Megan.
Great, thank you. We are going to host an event, like a WebEx event, on Wednesday, sort of in the lunchtime hour, and Thursday in the evening hour. I don't have those exact times in front of me. We're going to begin publicizing those later today, I believe, or early tomorrow morning. And really, people who are working on their ballots, who have questions, they can just bring them to us. If they're like, you know, what is this project? Or why is this project on the list? Or I have a project that I don't see on the list. That's an opportunity for folks to do that. And it just gives people another way to be heard outside of completing their ballots and helps them. So those are going to be the 2 office hours next week.
The 29th?
I'm going to throw in the chat. I'm just going to confirm the dates and times. I'll put it in the chat. We just haven't started the publication yet. So I will get on that right now.
I was just, Heather, you're muted if you're trying to speak. I was going to observe that I think the low bridge access policies that Heather just outlined for us are consistent with the conversation that we had a few weeks ago. And unless folks have a really burning problem with the specifics, I would say that, again, move forward with it so that we can, you know, even though it's a tiny bit of the need out there, we're at least getting the higher priority connections reestablished. So I thank you for your work on that. It looks to me like it's consistent with the conversations that we've had up to now.
Thank you so much, Greg. I do appreciate that. I know we have a number of members of the maritime community on the task force, and so I wonder if anybody would like to speak up about that.
Heather,
Jill or John.
sorry, Heather, this is Jill. Speak up specifically about the need for that access.
No, just well, it looks like there are a number of questions in the chat about the need for that access, and I think maybe I'll let you guys speak for yourselves.
Right. So I obviously can't speak for it. I'm with Vigor. Vigor, we employ approximately 600 people on the north end of Harbor Island, doing ship repair primarily, but these are trades jobs, critical, have been essential workers from the very beginning, and the bridge has had negative impact as it has on every single person involved in this. But nevertheless, maritime users down there have worked really, really hard to minimize their request of access to the bridge, such that for our company with 600, we're asking for access for 5 vehicles to be able to access that bridge. And others have done similar work. There's suppliers who provide fuel to Washington State ferries out of West Seattle, Vashon Island, run. So I think the work has gone on to greatly minimize what we're asking for. And we were thrilled a couple of weeks ago when the group agreed that that was a priority in terms of the economic benefits of all of those jobs that are reliant on that access. And also, again, the community has worked hard to minimize the request.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jill, indeed. Quickly, folks who had their hands digitally raised previously, let's go to Paulina and then Adam Majid, and then Fred, I also acknowledge your hand is up to follow after Adam.
I'm sorry, I'm actually good. That was a mistake. So go ahead.
Oh, okay, psyching us out. Adam, do you still have a question you'd like to raise? Maybe no. So Fred, let's come to you, and Adam, always happy to circle back.
Yeah, I'd like to express my appreciation that went into trying to juggle the various users for the lower bridge, especially in light of heightened concerns about its operability. And the port feels very much having been heard, and hopefully the essential workers feel similarly, and very much the mayor's statements and the emergency order very much emphasize the reflection of the importance of preserving access to these high-paying jobs. So it's really just a big thank you.
Thank you, and my apologies. I noticed that Adam is an attendee, not a panelist. It just scrolls between, and it's some reason lets everybody raise their hand, whether they can speak or not. Okay. I'm looking, apologies, through the chat. Anne has a question. Is there still a possibility that motorcycles will be allowed on the low bridge to keep them out of neighborhoods, or is that off the table?
Good question. We actually have a very thorough answer to that, but I'm going to give you the short version. And that is that motorcycles moving at that speed and among in that constrained environment and among other vehicles, it's not actually tremendously safe. And so the traffic engineers right now are telling me that that's not a good option. I'll send to the whole team or the whole task force the more articulate answer on that. Do appreciate you bringing it up.
Thank you. And then Heather, might be another one that you can address, as it is something that we've discussed. But Councilmember Herbold, your acknowledgement that some of the projects on the neighborhood-specific plans, the maps and lists, are pre-planned projects with existing funding, and how does that sort of factor in the overall prioritization that's happening. And that's something that we've given a lot of thought to, and maybe I'll give Heather a chance to answer.
You bet. So if projects are pre-planned and funded and underway, they are going to continue to go on. I think our interest there was to ensure that in an environment where things have changed so much, we just wanted to make sure that that the support for those projects was still there. And as it turns out, it absolutely is still there. So that won't, those projects won't in any way count against anything. It won't mean that South Park gets less. I don't think we want to think about that. I don't think we want to be on an equality standpoint. I think we want to be on an equity standpoint there. And so I do appreciate the input, and I also want to note that the people who put these surveys together are humans, and that the entire task force had an opportunity to take a look at those. So we're all giving each other a lot of grace. We are, I'm sure that there are projects that weren't reflected in the survey, and that's likely because they were either too large, more than $100,000, or would take too long, longer than a year to complete. And so we're trying to get through these quick build projects, these immediate needs, and then this is going to be a long process. And so we're going to continue to work with the community about what the highest priorities are with respect to traffic and changes that are visited on community by the closure of the bridge.
Thank you, Heather. And yeah, just to succinctly reiterate, those projects already funded and underway. Once a pool of resources is identified for a specific neighborhood, it's not like we would be sort of shifting that funding of existing pre-funded projects over to that. That body of work is wonderful and happening, but would be separate and apart from the consideration of work that needs to happen. This is a question that I'm not sure we have specific data to share straight away, though we may in real time shortly. But there's a question with regard to what traffic counts. This is from David B. Stock about what does traffic look like for use of the bridge just before opening up to general use? Is there a way to inch that back earlier than 9 p.m.? And Heather, I'm not sure if you want to comment on that, but I will acknowledge that it is something that SDOT looked at very closely about how early in the evening and how sort of late into the morning we could bump that window up. And this was as generous as we felt was appropriate given the need to respect access for emergency vehicles.
Yeah, we put that buffer in there. And I do want to note that this is going to be a dynamic policy that we're going to move through. I see a question from Amanda about low bridge access for local businesses in West Seattle. That's a great question, Amanda. Do you want to talk about that a little bit more?
I mean, sure, I can talk about it. I'm just curious. We're giving a lot of slots, it seems, to the port, which is fine in maritime, but I think that we're not addressing local businesses. For example, Husky. I know Dan owns Peel and Press, and I'm just curious how we are going to address that. And I guess I don't really know how many slots are now available based upon the current the current suggestions.
Mm-hmm. We have 10 contingency slots right now. Amanda, what would be really great is if maybe a group like the West Seattle Chamber of Commerce could get together and put together what the request is. We're going to look at this again in the fall after we go to automated enforcement. And so if we're going to have, after that, we're going to have a new number of slots that are available. So if the chamber or the BIA wanted to get together a proposal or a request, we would be very happy to consider that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Councilmember McDermott, do you want to voice the question you put in the chat box for others?
Thank you. I'd be happy to. I'm very supportive of essential workers being able to move around as part of their job during their day, and sympathetic, maybe less so for their commutes themselves. But a number of constituents have reached out and contacted me with concern about being able to make medical appointments, from a routine doctor's appointment to cancer treatment. And particularly, I got a swath of angry emails or upset emails one day when there was substantial midday work going on the First Avenue South Bridge. And I know 2 constituents who were substantially late after thinking they were leaving significant amount of time to get to procedures and missing or needing to substantially reschedule them. I recognize private cars are harder to, who would be making a one-off visit, are harder to track. But as we're talking about essential workers and commutes, I do need to raise the issue of allowing people to use the lower bridge to ease their commute to essential medical appointments.
Councilmember McDermott, thank you very much for that question. You're right. It is a lot harder for individual vehicles. But perhaps as we move forward into the fall and understand a little bit more about what kind of access we can afford, we can take that up. I would really appreciate, everyone's creative thinking about how to manage that. I'm not sure how, and it doesn't mean I'll never be able to figure it out, but right now it's hard for me to conceive how we would manage that. And when we get to the license plate, the automated enforcement, that makes it even more complicated. And so I just candidly right now, I don't know how to administer that. But I'm open to it. So to the extent that anyone on the task force has ideas there, I'm wide open to that.
Thank you both. So we have just 2 quick minutes left in this section before transitioning. I think we could squeeze one more in, which is a little quick, and the next in line, which is from Peter Goldman, which is, what about lower bridge access some portion of weekends? And we don't have that graphic available on this slide deck, but we did share in a previous conversation about access on the weekends, and that was certainly one of the first things we looked at, if that is a possibility. And weekends actually are much busier and tend to exceed with greater frequency that threshold of unfettered access for emergency vehicles. But we will perhaps just make a commitment to update those use slides and then circulate back to the task force so people have the latest data.
Thanks, Michael. I think that's a really good idea. And I'm just compelled to level set here a little bit. We can fit 100 or 450 vehicles per hour on the bridge without impacting emergency access. And so giving unfettered access during the day, whether it's the weekends or during the week, puts us in a position of potentially impacting those emergency trips that are, emergencies. We found that the volume of traffic over time, when we watched it at night, was never going to get to that 450 level. During the day, even on the weekends, it's a little bit of a different story. So we do have a team of traffic engineers who are paying attention to this like all the time, and looking at those numbers, and figuring out how many people we can allow to use the low bridge. At the same time, we also have to consider how we're going to administer that. And so this is a puzzle that we're going to continue to revisit, and to the extent that folks have ideas about administering when we identify additional slots that may be available, I'm all ears.
Okay, let's Michael move forward to the conversation with our guests from Metro.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'll turn it over to Heather to introduce and move us on to the next section here. Right on time.
All right, great. Ooh, look at us. Everyone, I would like to introduce you to Stephen Crosley, who is King County Metro's lead for the West Seattle Bridge closure, and he is here to discuss with all of us Metro's response to the West Seattle Bridge closure that has impacted all of us so much. Steve?
Thanks for that introduction, Heather. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Got a nod, got a thumbs up. All right, great. Thanks for putting that PowerPoint up, and I'll just ask, can move to the next slide as I will get into both our current response and our plans for moving West Seattle once we really can get moving again. I'll spend about 10 minutes on this presentation and then open it up for questions, and I'll monitor the chat, or Michael, you may be able to help me out with the chat box as well. Just wanted to highlight that before the bridge closure, we had 13 routes that traveled across the bridge. Some of those are currently suspended, but we had roughly 900 trips crossing the bridge per day and about 19,000 daily passengers. So that's about 9,500 people actually crossing the Duwamish into Soto downtown and back and forth again. That does not count for the ridership that's inside West Seattle, Burien, down to South Center, et cetera. And just wanted to highlight that transit service into and out of West Seattle is not just crucial to jobs, but it's also crucial to school, dining, entertainment, and other activities, and also major regional connections as well. Next slide, please. So what is happening now? Essentially, all of our routes that are not suspended are currently traveling on the low bridge. We have had a great partnership with the city of Seattle in terms of transit priority. As you know, low bridge is for transit, emergency, and freight access. We are actually seeing very low delays and actually having great reliability because of the enforcement on the bridge. Our travel times between West Seattle and downtown are almost basically the same as they were pre-COVID and pre-bridge closure. As you well know, it is a swing bridge, and those openings can cause delays, and that's what we're monitoring, and we're noticing about 4 per day that we're being affected by, and there's about 10 to 15 minutes per opening. Another thing that we're doing, and I'll get to our data analytics in just a moment, is that we do monitor loads on our entire network because we are currently required to physically distance on our coaches. We have a limit of 12 passengers per 40-foot coach and 18 passengers per 60-foot coach. And so we're monitoring those loads. Actually, within West Seattle, we haven't seen overloads of physical distancing yet, but there are other areas of Seattle, such as Route 70, down on the A line, the F line, and the E line, where we're actually adding supplemental trips right now to meet those physical distancing needs.
Steve, what
percentage
of your normal capacity does that represent?
Oh boy, yes, that's a fantastic question. It is a substantial decrease in capacity. Actually, on a 60-foot coach, we can fit 83 people standing and seated. And so out of 20, so it's basically we're down to about 25% or less, 25% of full capacity on our coaches. And that's basically similar to the water taxi as well. The water taxi is limited right now at 86 passengers, and a full water taxi, they allow 278 people on the boat.
Thank you.
Do you want to highlight actually that picture that's over there? We've coordinated with the city of Seattle, and there are a number of transit priority improvements that lead us up to that bridge, in addition to just the restrictions up on Delridge. Actually, I'm a Pigeon Point resident. I live near Pathfinder School, so when I'm finally going back to work, I'll catch the 120 or the 125 into downtown. We currently have a peak period transit only lane going northbound that ends at Andover, between Oregon and Andover. And the city has rechannelized Delridge north of Andover to allow a transit only slip lane that goes directly to the bridge. They've also added a transit only approach at the 5-way Schlon intersection that really enables us to get into that slot and then onto the bridge. And then the other really good improvement I want to highlight that the city did for Metro was we have 2 routes that currently operating in SODO, which is Route 50 and Route 21. Because of the West Seattle Bridge closure, the initial closure of the West Seattle Bridge First Avenue South on-ramps happened, but we then had to operate on Spokane Street, and that was causing up to an hour delay during BNSF switching. So the city allowed transit to access that ramp and then allows us to go over Spokane Street, over the BNSF tracks, and get back down onto the low bridge. Just wanted to highlight some of those collaboration of transit priority improvements.
Okay.
Next slide, please. As part of our action plan, we immediately set up a team to address the West Seattle response, and then we also set up a data analytics platform. Metro uses Microsoft Power BI to analyze data analytics, and what we're currently, and I have a next slide actually showing kind of just a highlight of a page, but what we're actually looking at is route ridership by time period. We're looking at bridge passenger loads, not just overall route ridership, but we're looking at bridge passenger loads and crowding on that. So essentially thinking about the last stop for the Sea Line on Avalon and Yancey, and then the first stop for the Sea Line over Alaska and Columbia. How full is that bus compared to how full it would be in other parts of West Seattle? Another really important thing that we're doing is we're monitoring segment travel times, and we're actually trying to disaggregate that even more than just from between stop and stop. But what that allows us to do is really assess reliability and any variance in that travel time. And for any wonky people, we're looking at standard deviations. And so basically, if the overall standard deviation of delay is increasing over a period of time, then we know that that segment is becoming more unreliable. And that allows us to, again, take a look at that segment and see if any transit priority improvements could be implemented. We're also monitoring bridge openings and delays, like I said, to see that we're actually doing that on the First Avenue South Bridge, the South Park Bridge, and the Spokane Street Bridge. And next slide, please. So this is just a quick highlight of our one sheet of our data analytics, and this is showing just the segment run times. Don't need to get into too many details there, but you can see that we're looking week over week percent increases in travel time. And those different colors there are highlighting it by different times of day. And so you can see the PM peak, that purple line kind of over on your right-hand side of the screen. There's a lot bigger variation in travel time on the First Avenue South Bridge and the PM peak than there was previously, and that's probably a lot to do with increasing traffic congestion. We also have these slides and these sheets for all the other types of data analytics, and we update them on a daily basis. Next slide, please. So here we're going to get into Metro's response and our action plan. So basically the day of the closure, we immediately established a West Seattle Bridge response team. I was designated as a project manager. I report to Bill Bryant, who's the manager of service development, and then we all report directly up to our general manager, deputy general manager, and chief of staff on this project. We meet frequently with SDOT to identify opportunities and develop solutions. We probably meet with SDOT in a variety of natures at least 3 to 4 times a week to talk about different aspects of the West Seattle response. We've also conducted some origin and destination surveys and analyses to understand travel patterns. The city has also done the same. Just wanted to highlight what you're seeing on the screen there. Probably comes as no surprise, but we wanted to confirm it. That middle graphic there is showing where our boardings are in West Seattle, and this is a ridership density heat map, and where are our lightings in SODO and downtown. And you can see that basically for our services, it's heavily concentrated in downtown. I think that red dot in SODO is probably Starbucks. I can also see the link station there. And then there's also some demand up in the South Lake Union area, which the Sea Line continues to. The other thing that we did to analyze demand and just to confirm, where we would be best investing our resources, We took Teralytics cell phone data. The city also has done something similar. We looked at census tracts. So we actually disaggregated by zip code, looked specifically at census tracts. And you're seeing here on the screen one census tract up in the Admiral area, and then one census tract down in the Westwood Village, kind of White Center area. And what we've confirmed is that the vast majority of travel between this 5 to 9 a.m. commute period is actually between downtown SoDo and South Lake Union. There's some travel to SeaTac and some travel to South Center. But again, what we're getting at here is that there is a lot of demand that can be met by transit on our current fixed route network into the core CID areas. And we're also developing an action plan that we should be finalizing this week, and we'll be publishing it up on our Metro website. The plan has been reviewed by our general manager and the county executive, and has approval of both of them, and we'll be publishing that very soon. And I will actually highlight some of those elements in just a minute. So next slide, please.
Hey, Steve, just real quick, we have two questions I'll try and bundle together from Deb Barker. Asking, does Metro keep track of tide tables to know when Low Bridge might be opening up? And then a question with regard to the very red dot in Admiral, and any idea what that is a representation of?
So the second one, I believe that huge red dot in Admiral, that has to be the intersection of California and Admiral, and that's a big transfer point between the 128, the 50. And so I think that's just where a lot of the transit service is being picked up there in the Admiral neighborhood. To speak to the question about tide tables when there might be a bridge opening, I actually don't have the answer to that. We're tracking the bridge Twitter feed, and we've written an API code to actually to pull that. So I guess the question on tracking tide tables and bridge openings would probably be better suited for city or other marine folks as opposed to myself.
Steve, it's Heather. Let me just interrupt by saying that the tide tables don't always correlate perfectly well to bridge openings. So like it's a handy, helpful, possible hint, but it's not a perfect one-to-one.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
And then we have a question from our co-chair Paulina, asking, how is Metro using the mobility framework principles in your new West Seattle Bridge task force to invest transit where the needs are the greatest? Talking specifically, or as an example, the Duwamish Valley, the more buses we offer, the less traffic, pollution, and less folks cutting through neighborhoods.
Yes, it's a fantastic question, and what I didn't really want to get too much in detail in this conversation was just financial constraints. But what we need to do is to plan for what we're able to actually provide via September, March, and September 2021. Understanding that there's going to be significant cuts from the STBD and the vehicle license fee, even if we bring back some of that with a new STBD. So we do have actually our service change plan ready for September 2021, and I'll get to that in just a moment. And any way to mitigate any of those equity concerns or traffic concerns, obviously we would love to engage in a public process to look at additional needs, and again, that might just require some third-party funding. So that is that's the caveat there. Is we just need to be able to do a transparent public process, but obviously with no guarantees, because not only it's the county, but the city and other agencies are financially constrained, and those new routes obviously cost quite a pretty penny. So not rule it out, but we want to make sure that we're also meeting the core needs of the current fixed route network as well. Next slide, please.
Oh,
so what I want to highlight about our action plan is that we are anticipating multiple scenarios. Right now, the Low Bridge is available and it's prioritized for transit and other essential traffic. Again, I live right in the neighborhood. I've taken the bus in and out of downtown just a couple times to see how things are going, and we are very reliable. It's a really quick trip because there are actually anyone on the port call today, we actually have added stops on Harbor Island to provide accessibility to the marina. probably can't reach North Harbor Island without some sort of assistance or a shuttle. But those stops on Spokane, on Harbor Island, really provide easy walking access to the marina. And so we're really hoping that the low bridge remains open and accessible and reliable. And that is really our best reliable pathway. But we're also planning for and have already addressed short-term closures of low bridge. We have reroutes in place when those occur. There have been planned closures of the low bridge and there have been unplanned closures of the low bridge, and they have been short-term closures. And so we have reroutes planned to go down West Marginal Way and over the First Avenue South Bridge. And then we have the third scenario, which we hope that does not occur. And in conversations with our discussions, meetings with Heather Marks, it sounds like that probably is hopefully a little bit less and less likely these days. The city being able to hopefully wrap the structure. But if there is instability or some sort of collapse scenario and a long-term closure of the low bridge, we do have contingency plans for that as well. And that actually would result in a more reconfigured metro network, which would potentially split some routes, such as, say, the 120, so you wouldn't be doubling back when you came all the way up to Andover and then all the way back down. There would be a greater focus on the water taxi and more service to the water taxi, et cetera. But again, hopefully that doesn't have to happen, but we do have a plan for that. Also wanted to highlight that it's a living document and conditions will and are going to change. There's just so much uncertainty surrounding demand, surrounding attitudes towards transit, surrounding returning to work, et cetera. But what we're really focusing on in this action plan is our near-term needs through March 2021. In September, we're going to be adding back our peak commuter routes in the Admiral neighborhood, the 55, 56, 57. In late June, we added back Route 21X, which is a peak commuter route, and we also added back the Route 125. So in West Seattle, even though we're not going to be bringing back Route 37 and a couple other of the Vashon Island routes, the 116, 118, and 119, we are making investments in West Seattle that we probably would not make elsewhere countywide, and focusing on those peak commute routes. Between March 21 and September 2021, there may be additional cuts or there may be additional influx of dollars from the STBD. And so really there we want to be flexible to help meet that demand that is anticipated to return. And that is our goal through September 21. And hopefully we can be able to adjust and make service change adjustments between these service change dates, which we do twice a year to help meet that demand. As I mentioned earlier, we do have the capacity to add supplemental service if there is crowding or people are being passed up. Again, I came from San Francisco many years ago, and being passed up by 5 buses in a row was never fun. And even being passed up by 1 bus these days is never fun. So that is our goal as planners at Metro, is to really make sure that all trips can be made really conveniently and accessibly.
Steve, I acknowledge you have about 7 more slides to make it through, so I'm just going to bundle a couple questions here, and one that is related to just what you were talking about from Councilmember Herbold. Councilmember Herbold, do you want to ask your question related to STBD emerging
Thank you so much.
funding?
I appreciate it. So the STBD proposal before the council right now has a very helpful and appreciated proposed earmark for emergency needs for West Seattle and surrounding neighborhoods associated with the bridge closure. One of the things I've not been able to get a handle on is whether or not those funds, if fully expended to mitigate transit needs associated with the bridge closure, will that allow us to make any gains in transit service, or will it just reduce the number of cuts that we are experiencing? I'm just trying to get a sense of, if the motion goal is from 17% to 30%, will that designation of funding and service for West Seattle and South Park mitigation of transit needs help us get there, or is it just going to help us stay closer to exactly where we're at? And the reason why this is a really important question for me right now is because there is an amendment to increase the STBD funding from 0.1% to 0.2% of a sales tax. And so with a higher percentage, we might be able to do more to help get us to that 30% mode shift.
Councilmember Herbold, that's an excellent question, and we actually have done a thorough analysis of all the service hours that are being cut due to the current cuts in STBD, and then what we would gain back. And I just pulled up the table. It's not on this. It's not in this presentation, but it would get us close. It looks like we need about 42,000 service hours between September 2020 and what we had in fall 2019 to get back to the fall 2019 levels. My understanding is that the STBD would gain about, with the 0.1%, about 30,000 service hours. So we would get incrementally closer there. And then, you know, we also looked at a scenario that if we went well above that, and it would be about another 100,000 service hours above kind of this September 2020 level, that would boost us even more capacity than we had fall 2019. So that 0.2% sales tax could really help us get there. What I do want to speak to is that the city, and we've been working closely with the city on the mode split targets, and the city's mode split targets, currently we're looking at kind of the peak hour for commute periods. Overall, you know, Metro, we're looking at kind of the 5 a.m. to 9 a.m. commute period, especially with all the water taxi capacity over that commute period, as well as all of our bus capacity. And we really do feel like we can meet what the city is asking for over that full commute period pretty well with the kind of September 2020 service change. Obviously, STBD would really help that, but I do want to highlight that the biggest wild card is physical distancing, and that means that our capacity is just severely reduced. So once we get someday we can get back to normal and eliminate physical distancing, we do have quite a lot of capacity to move folks to and from West Seattle. That helps.
Steve. Lisa, you're
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'd love to receive that analysis if you don't mind sending it to my office. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, we can probably just send you the report, which includes that analysis.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
Can I ask you an impossible question? Can you predict when you'll be able to higher occupancy level? I mean, what will be necessary to get to a higher occupancy level?
That's a fantastic question, and I wish I had a crystal ball. It's one of my biggest challenges that as a professional planner, I've always wanted to cram a bunch of people in a small amount of space and realize that is not possible right now. We are following the governor's order, so it's probably not going to be anytime until we get into phase 4. I have been, looking at what's going on, say, in England, and they've reduced their distancing from 2 meters to 6 feet to 1 feet. So that does increase capacity. Also, if we had kind of universal mask usage on buses, that could also help. And we do have a recovery task force that is looking at all of those concerns, and probably at a bit later meeting when we maybe have that fleshed out a little bit more and maybe a little understanding of where this first/second wave pandemic is headed, we might have a little better answers to that. So right now, I wish I could give you a better answer on that.
We all do. Thank you.
Yeah. No, it's a real challenge right now because we're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. We're actually operating 85% of our trips right now, but we just have such limited capacity. So then again, people are not really returning to work, so it's kind of chicken or the egg, and it's also going to result in attitude towards transit and people being safe getting back on transit. And we're really getting to that point. We're working to install like plexiglass shields to be able to charge fares again and allow people to board through the front door. We're looking at mask dispensers, whether that's at major stations or even on buses. So we're trying to do what we can to get back to that, and working closely with APTA ridership recovery as well, kind of on a national scale, to see how we can kind of collaborate with our key transit agencies nationwide.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I can think, any other questions, Michael, or next slide?
There's a handful of questions, but I might suggest that we make it through your slides because we have just about 5 more minutes and can go over by a minute or two, but let's make it through those and then we'll come back time permitting, to these questions,
Yes.
but we will make sure that they're all related to Metro and answers are
Great.
received.
So next slide, please. And very quickly, the 118 and 119 are being reconfigured on Vashon Island, and so they will terminate at the Vashon Ferry Terminal, so you can either take the water taxi or the Washington State Ferry. The 118 and 119 will just not continue onto Fauntleroy and then into downtown. The 116 is being suspended, and I believe that that is a permanent suspension. However, if there's demand increase, like I just want to say, if there's demand increases or demand can't be met by the sea line at Fauntleroy, then we do have the capacity to look at those, to come back. Again, I wanted to highlight some specific objectives. Again, we all know that travel between West Seattle and downtown and SoDo is really important, and we want to provide those fast and reliable and comfortable mobility solutions. It's primarily going to be on fixed route bus, rapid ride, and water taxi. And we also have, good connections in downtown to get intra-Seattle and to regional connections. We also want to offer van pool programs to those destinations that are not easily reached by fixed route transit. We do have a surplus of vans available. So when that demand returns to traditional van pool, we do have that capacity as well. And then I also wanted just to highlight that we also want to ensure that transit within West Seattle continues to serve all the major neighborhoods and linkages and origins and destinations. I was just looking at ridership today, and like 120, 128, about 50, they're about 50% of fall 2019 baseline, whereas bridge crossings are about 20% of fall 19 baseline. So there's still a lot of travel going on intra-West Seattle that we need to account for as well. Next slide, please. So this is just our actually probably skip that slide really quickly. That was just our priorities, and that Metro highlight that we do much more than just bus and water taxi. We have a whole host of solutions. We have a shared shuttle employer program we'll be talking about next week with employers. So we really want to look at all solutions and very supportive of non-motorized as well. Here's the highlight, just our customer focused priorities. Really, there are, again, a lot of people riding the bus who are reliant on transit, who don't have cars, and then others who have just chosen to continue riding for essential or other trips. And we really want to meet those needs first and foremost. Our second priority is to really gain back those customers that we lost, which includes even a lot of Metro employees who are no longer commuting downtown, or City of Seattle employees that live in West Seattle that are no longer commuting downtown, like Heather and myself and a few other folks who are on this call. And then the third priority is to attract those new customers who previously drove. We understand and hope that there are solutions, mobility solutions, that are much more convenient and reliable and travel time competitive now than driving once the First Avenue South Bridge really starts to get congested. Next slide, please. Oh, here's the mobility. Yeah, so here's the mobility solutions. Again, we have first, last mile, we have van pool, and we're even looking at we're coordinating with city, looking at additional park and rides, et cetera. So anything that we can do to improve mobility, adding bike lockers in key locations such as the water taxi or the junction, et cetera. Anything we can do to facilitate movements to frequent fixed route transit, we're all supportive of. Some of these would require additional third-party funding, and I think that's probably my next slide. Is some high impact mobility improvements. So we do have a service plan set for September 2020, and that includes bringing back routes 55, 56, and 57. They will not probably have the exact same service levels they did pre-COVID. But again, we're bringing back the vast majority of routes on West Seattle. I think the 22, 37, and again, those Vashon Island routes will stay suspended for the near future. So we've, in coordination with the City of Seattle, in lieu of any significant capital improvements, we wanted to see operationally what could we do to have high impact mobility improvements, and these would all require some sort of third-party funding, be it the city or other sources, but they would not require any new capital needs. We are also closely coordinated with our Marine Division, and so we would look at upgrading water taxi service to 2 boats up to all day and year round. We're currently operating our winter schedule, which is 6 boats. 6 boats in the commute period, and a 2-boat commute period would increase that to 11 boats in the AM and PM. And then we also have an option. Our summer schedule has off-peak service as well to serve the tourist market and any fringes of the commute market. And so we're looking at all those options to bring a second boat, incrementally to Seacrest Dock. That could also result in shuttle improvements to the 773 and 775, increasing frequency and potentially a third route. The last three are frequency improvements to current services. So it would be upgrading, say, the C line to 10 trips per hour or 6-minute frequencies during the peak and off peak. And this would be between that 5 a.m. and 9 p.m. period when travel on the low bridge is prohibited for general purpose traffic. We'd also look at all-day bus service between Admiral and downtown. Currently it's peak service. And then also we were looking at upgrading Route 50 frequency to perhaps between 10 to 15 minutes to the Soto Link Station. We're expecting at some point, hopefully in October or thereabouts, that the Lander Street Bridge crossing will be completed. And that would allow even a faster trip to the Soto Link Station to access regional destinations. Next slide, please. Just wanted to highlight, this is the last two slides, and I'll answer some of those questions. Just where we're at with customer information and communication. We put up a blog post last week, and we're currently working on kind of permanent website in our project and programs area. So customers can access this information, including our action plan, any FAQ. And these maps, probably a little bit hard to see on the screen, they're in our blog post, but just wanted to highlight, we're trying to simplify information for our customers. Map on your left is showing what service is currently available in West Seattle to downtown and Soto. And that map on your right is actually showing connections, direct connections once you get into downtown, how you can get to connections within Seattle. And so really the help here is that you can find a stop you can get off on the C line or the 120, and hey, I need to get to First Hill. How do I get to that stop on Route 12 to get to First Hill or Madison Valley or Capitol Hill? And the next slide, please, will show us some connections to the East Side and South King County. And again, we wanted to disaggregate some of that to help the customers understand, because there's a lot of service going on the 2nd Avenue, 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And really, this is to help people both coming in and out of any regional connection, how they can easily access any of those stops. And again, we also have link stations highlighted in there as well. This is a work in progress, but we're really trying to keep things simplified for our customers. And I think that really sums up our overall action plan and the work that Metro has been doing. We have a really robust team that is made up of the Marine Division, service planning, our system impacts group, our communications group, and overall service development group. And so we've been really happy with the progress we've made and the coordination we have with the city. And any time remaining, I'm happy to answer remaining questions.
Thank you, Steve. We're about 3 minutes over,
Okay.
so let's just make it an even 5. And so I'll give you 2 quick questions, and then I don't want to shortchange the next window of time because it's a lot of content to also get through. So one of the questions from Representative Fitzgibbon, where might a third water taxi shuttle route go? And then from Dan, will Metro consider a route for the Alaska Junction hub to Capitol Hill for medical workers and medical appointments?
So those are both great questions. Right now, there's a really good connection via Alaska Junction to the First Hill area. Of course, it requires a transfer. There's obviously, again, further discussions can be had in terms of a transparent public process. Again, Metro is very focused on equity and our financial constraints. And so that would be a significant consideration. I think there also could be consideration for, say, a shared employer shuttle up to the First Hill area. So I think there's a lot of options available to get folks up there. I know folks do currently walk, say, from 3rd Avenue or when they come in from the water taxi up there. So that would definitely a consideration that we're looking into. And then a third water taxi shuttle route. Actually, if we added a second boat, we would continue to operate to Pier 50, and that would provide that additional commute period. Our Marine Division has put out an RFQ for additional dock space in West Seattle. and I believe we received 3+ responses. So a second route could essentially go to, say, the Ferris wheel area. I think they've put out a request for that. So we'd be looking at different dock options there. The one benefit to the Coleman Dock and Pier 50 area is that provides direct connections to all the services right on 3rd Avenue. It's a little, it's a couple blocks, but it provides really good connections to Link and to all of our regional routes on 2nd and 4th and 5th. So that is something that we would definitely explore. And yes, there are explorations going on with the city to look at additional terminals. Again, that would require additional capital facilities. Our Seacrest dock, I just want to highlight to the folks on the call, our Seacrest dock, we can fit 2 boats on there, and that would end up with 20-minute frequencies, so 3 boats an hour, and that's the limit. And so anything past that would need new additional capital expenses. But do want to highlight that with 2 boats during just a commute period, without the physical distancing, social distancing, we can move about 2,500 people per commute period. So it's actually a lot of volume capacity we can move. So that's probably at my time. So thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you, Steve,
Mayor
so
Nichols.
much. And can we count on working with you? We'll relay all the questions to you, and then perhaps try and have answers back to folks who didn't get a chance to have their question addressed.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. Please feel free to send questions right along to me. Absolutely. Yep. Thanks, Michael.
Wonderful. Thank you, Steve. And so with that, I will turn it back over to the one and only Heather Marks, who will lead us into the next section of our discussion.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Michael. It's a real pleasure to be back with everyone. So you all, this is the real stuff. This is what everybody's been waiting for, the cost benefit analysis. So if we can move to the next slide, please. As the name implies, cost benefit analysis looks at the pros and cons of multiple options for repairing and or replacing the bridge. It considers the dollar costs, but it looks at lots of other attributes to determine the best choice, not just from a one-dimensional perspective, but from a multi-dimensional perspective. The alternatives analysis that is in this CBA, that's shorthand for cost benefit analysis, is 6 different concepts to replace traffic capacity based on a defined set of attributes and assumptions, which we will go into. And this task force will have a real hand in shaping. The analysis is going to help inform our decision to repair or replace the West Seattle high-rise bridge. And as all of you know, if you have a hand in setting up the criteria by which a decision is made, then you're really controlling the way that decision comes out. So next slide, please. So just a little timeline to level set. We are giving you an overview today, and you'll get a chance to dig into the attributes or criteria. On the 5th, we are going to have the technical advisory panel co-chairs come and talk a little bit more about the cost benefit analysis, but more importantly, we're going to get your input on those evaluation criteria. July through August, at some point in August, we're going to get that first cost benefit analysis deliverable, which includes the basis of design. Those are like the very basic engineering assumptions we are making about the choices available. The evaluation criteria, again, this is where you guys have a really strong role, and also the alternative design concepts. You will see, you heard it here first. You are going to see some of those concepts today. And then in August and September, we'll have that next part of the cost benefit analysis, including cost estimates, the risk and opportunity assessment, and a final analysis of those criteria. And then in October, we will have completed the cost benefit analysis. And I think everybody's expecting that we will have a city recommendation that everyone on this group and in the community will have seen us march toward. It's an ongoing decision-making process, and every option is continuing to advance as quickly as possible. This is our overall philosophy of keeping everything moving forward until it becomes clear that an option is no longer on the table. Next slide, please. So here are the basic assumptions that are going into this cost-benefit analysis. That repairs are technically feasible. Doesn't mean they're advisable, but they are feasible. We're going to use predefined attributes or criteria to evaluate the costs and benefits of the immediate next steps, either repair or replace. The replacement options are in the same alignment as the current bridge. This is just for the purpose of the cost-benefit analysis because we have to make sure we have an apples-to-apples comparison. If once we get through the cost-benefit analysis and have selected one of those concepts, that's where we go into a fuller exploration about alignment and materials. All alternatives estimate that travel capacity is restored to the corridor at the latest by 2026. Next slide, please. So is everybody coming along with me so far? I know it's a lot of information to take in. So here is what is not included. This is only a qualitative analysis. Only a qualitative analysis will be performed for replacement alternatives, including a bridge or a tunnel. If we decide to go down that replacement road, we will perform a type, size, and location study. Oh my God, SDOT, why do you have to do another study? We have to do another study if we want to get federal funding. It's part of the process. And that deeper analysis will further examine the multiple replacement alternatives, including tunnel and bridge options outside of the current bridge's footprint. Based on the type, size, and location study, we'll present a number of alternatives to you so that we can reach the best option for replacement if that's the direction that we have decided to go. We will then begin the design work on the preferred alternative. So before we move to the next slide, let me just pause for a second and maybe take 2 or 3 questions if you have them, so that we can make sure we've level set and we are. So Peter, I note that you are wondering, you're challenging the assumption that the tunnel would be situated under the existing high bridge. That's really a good point. However, as I mentioned, we need to keep everything on the same alignment so that we can provide an apples to apples comparison. If we select the tunnel or a bridge replacement, then we would open our minds to more and better alternatives. In general, the type, size, and location being the last word, is where those things get considered. Councilmember McDermott, 2026 is the latest that traffic would return to the bridge. We will be considering both construction as well as new option impacts, but probably, well, you'll see when we get into the criteria how we're going to address those things.
Heather, this is Peter. I don't know if I'm out of protocol to respond.
Probably.
Right now. Okay, I'll just wait. I'll wait until I have a moment, but I just, again, want to make a point about that because I'm not sure that the apples to apples and oranges to oranges comparison is sound when we're talking about how to replace something economically. So anyway, when I have a moment, I'll chat.
Yeah, and you and I, and really anybody else who is particularly interested in us exploring the tunnel alternative, we might want to have a separate chat about that, because I think that there are some complexities with the tunnel and connecting the tunnel, a new tunnel, to the existing structures that that maybe makes it a little more interesting. We're not evaluating a deep bore tunnel. Let's see. No, 2026 is the latest. So if we repair it, and you'll see this in the next slide, if we repair it, we could probably get traffic on sooner. If replaced, 2026 is the latest that we have.
Let's go to
Move on.
the next slide to just
Great.
ground that.
Yep, I think that's a great idea. I just wanted to, before we move on to the additional detail, I just wanted to make sure that that everybody was sort of with me. So there, hi, Councilmember Herbold, what do you got?
I just wanted to get the timeline straight for decision making. The slide back on, I think it was slide 31, says that the CBA will be done in October. But what is our estimated timeline for making a decision about whether or not to proceed for repair replacement? Are you planning that decision to be in October also,
Yes.
or is that sometime after?
We anticipate that we will have a decision, a recommendation and a decision in October.
Okay, thank you.
We're trying to move these things along as quickly as we can. And so some of this is a little bit fast. And so we're hoping people come along with us as we try to make this decision as quickly as possible. Amanda, the quantitative analysis is going to happen in the type, size, and location. Okay, so there are 3 scenarios: shore, repair, or replace. So in shoring, we have a temporary shoring situation. There's a potential to restore traffic in 2022, and it might last 3 or so years. In the repair scenario, there are 2 options. One is repairs including carbon fiber wrap and external post-tensioning with foundation strengthening. That would last about 15 years and be done in 2022. The third option there is partial superstructure replacement with foundation strengthening. Could restore traffic in 2022. It would last about 15 years. The replacement scenarios include 3 concepts. One is a full superstructure replacement with foundation strengthening. Could restore traffic in 2025. It'll last us 50 years. Number 5 is a full bridge replacement in the same footprint. It'll be done in 2026 and it'll last us 75 years. And then number 5 is a tunnel replacement. There's a potential to restore traffic in 2026 and the approximate lifespan would be 75 years. Okay. We have that tunnel information, the lifespan of it from our panel of experts. Next slide, please.
And Heather, can I just make one quick acknowledgement before we jump to that next slide? If we could go back to that chart. I just want to acknowledge for folks who are taking meticulous notes of previous timelines and things that have been shared. And we've tried to add sort of full information here, but it's a lot of words. When we're talking about approximate lifespan for each of these 3 different categories, we had initially talked about repair sort of giving us 10 years of life, and now we're talking about 15 plus. And even though we sort of say here below kind of why that is, I just want to verbally acknowledge that has moved from 10 to 15 plus as a result of some of the non-destructive evaluation testing and other analysis that we've done on the bridge since then, and have come to see not our worst fears shown through that testing. And so that's why there's been that shift. And we've also provided a blog with everybody last night and posted for public reading today that goes a little bit further down that rabbit hole. But I just wanted to acknowledge that for folks.
Thank you very much, Michael. I do appreciate that. Next slide, please. So this is concept 1. This is a shoring effort to restore traffic capacity. If you look at the top image, this is a K-frame shoring system where we would install steel to support the bridge. There, you notice that we'll have to have a barge in the water for quite some time in order to hoist that and secure it. In addition, we would have to design it so that those legs of the K don't interfere with the swing bridge operations. If you look at the image below, you can see that we would have another option is a steel truss shoring system. Again, this is one that would require long-term barge placement so that we could hoist those steel pieces into place and secure them. So you remember that was concept number one. This is a shoring in order to restore live load. Next slide, please. Oh, let me just note that our engineers would want me to reinforce to you that these are not to scale and they are just for illustrative purposes only. So please don't fall in love with any of these. Cost benefit analysis option 2. This is repair to restore traffic capacity. One of the things we could do is install additional post tensioning and stabilization. Next slide, please. So the superstructure, you may remember from earlier conversations, superstructure is everything that's above the piers. So the bridge deck, as well as the structural elements, in this case, concrete box girders that hold it into place. So for that middle span, we would raise a steel box girder into place. Next slide, please. Option number 4, we're looking at both a concrete balanced cantilever. This is essentially replacing what we have with, you know, a similar response. So another concrete box girder. And then the second concept there is a steel box girder for the bridge. So again, full superstructure replacement. Next slide, please. Option number 5 is the full replacement in the same footprint. We can all ooh and ah over the cable stay bridge, but these are full replacements in the same footprint, steel truss cable or steel truss bridge and a cable stay bridge. And next slide, please. So this is an option for the tunnel concept. What we're exploring for the CBA would run under the current bridge. If, you know, we decided we wanted to pursue this into the type, size, and location study, we would have more leisure to design a tunnel that would be in a different alignment. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the most important part of the scheme, the proposed evaluation criteria. So constructability, environmental, equity, forward compatibility. This is where forward compatibility has to do with everyone who's interested in sound transit. Forward compatibility is that item. Funding availability, multimodal impacts, maintenance and inspection, mobility, regional business impact, and safety seismic. And where that's just for you. So let's just let that marinate for just a second. And next slide, please. So this is the first set of evaluation criteria. We have another. These are the questions that we would ask ourselves for each of these options related to the evaluation criteria. So constructability means exactly what it sounds like. Will the contractor be able to build the bridge given site constraints and schedule? Environmental, what kind of temporary and permanent impacts will the bridge or tunnel have on the Duwamish River and surrounding area? can we build it within the mandated in-water work windows? Equity, will underrepresented communities be positively or negatively impacted by the preferred alternative? Forward compatibility, is it compatible with Sound Transit, light rail, or other transit? Funding, is the preferred alternative eligible for federal, state, local, or emergency funding? Next slide, please. Maintenance, inspection, and operation needs. What will the preferred alternative need over its lifespan of maintenance and inspection? So an interesting note, steel bridges have to be painted regularly. So that's an ongoing maintenance cost that we would have to consider. We would also have to consider how the new structure, whether it's a bridge or a tunnel, would connect to existing infrastructure, existing street networks. Mobility, does the preferred alternative facilitate or hinder the movement of people and goods? How will it impact current local and regional traffic? Multimodality, will the preferred alternative accommodate multiple modes of transportation, including transit, pedestrian, and vehicle traffic? Regional business, how will the preferred alternative impact regional and local businesses as pertains to the movement of people and goods and overall access? Will it impact the ship channel? Will construction affect business access? And then finally, safety and seismic, what seismic standards will the preferred alternative have to meet? Next slide, please. Okay, this is how we turn those attributes into weighting. So if you look down the left side of the this matrix, you'll see all of the attributes listed. And the ratings are shown for illustration only. Don't panic, we haven't done this yet. How we engage with this is that you compare each criteria against each other criteria. So you see that all the criteria have been given a letter. And so you compare bridge maintenance, inspection, and operation to constructability, and you decide which is more important, bridge maintenance, inspection, and operation, or constructability. And you put the letter that is sort of the winner of those two in that box. Then you compare bridge maintenance, inspection, and operation to environmental, which wins. So as soon as you've compared each one to each one, then you have this matrix that's filled out and you count how many times the letter in question shows up. So across from bridge maintenance and inspection, which has the letter A, you count up all the A's in the matrix and you put them in that yellow total. A shows up 2 times, so the total is 2, and you fill all of those down. Then you convert those into percentages, and that is the weight factor that each of those criteria get in the analysis. Does that make sense? Even just a little bit. Does it make the tiniest bit of sense? Paulina, did you just give me a thumbs up? That's awesome.
Actually,
Sorry, I lost you halfway there.
can you hear me? I was just wondering the criteria. Who's setting? No, the evaluation criteria is good, but the scores. Who is putting all the scores?
Good question. So how we are thinking about it today, and we would really love to have the task force's input here, is that there are 3 bodies that should weigh in here. The first is the community task force. So we want the community task force to fill this in. Second is the technical advisory panel. We want the experts that we have brought in to help us with this to weigh in as well. In addition, SDOT, as the owner of the asset, we're the ones that are going to have to take care of it and maintain it and operate it. We would also be able to insert our opinions. We're still working, Paulina, just to be perfectly candid, on how to meld those three responses together in an equitable way. And so, you know, if people have thoughts, we're absolutely welcome to chime in with that. Do we want to take, Michael, is there time in the agenda for a quick pause for questions?
We do have time for questions. Yes.
Heather.
Okay. Yes, sir.
I'm still struggling with the answer to Peter Goldman's question on the tunnel. And a tunnel going underneath the current bridge would be far deeper and not be able to be constructed along this this concept that has been raised so much publicly. How does that make it an apple-to-apple comparison?
So I wonder if Matt Donahue is here and if he would be willing to help me out with this one.
Sure. Hi, Heather. Yeah, I'm still here. So no matter where you put the tunnel, whether it's north of the existing low bridge and high bridge or south of those bridges, there's obstructions. And the idea with using the existing high bridge alignment is because of the level that we're looking at tunnel and bridge replacements as a crossing replacement. There's all sorts of issues. You could go way down the rabbit hole, which we do in a type, size, and location study for all the different alignments for a full bridge replacement, because that has the same issue, right? If you use a full bridge replacement in the existing alignment, you have to take out the foundations or try to reuse and retrofit them to some extent. We haven't gotten into the specific details of how WSP is analyzing a tunnel at the CBA level. But in our initial discussions, the thinking was that we would try and keep the tunnel as shallow as we possibly could, as driven by other factors in the waterway, and then excavate the existing foundations out to accommodate that tunnel. There's been a lot of discussion about putting sunken tunnel segments in the waterway to the north. Keep in mind that we have to keep things at 7% grade or below. Current grades on the high rise are at about 6%. So whatever you use in the waterway, there's still tunnel segments or lower than existing grade segments of the roadway that'll have to be installed to accommodate that 6%. Then you have to cross back over either above or below Southwest Spokane Street and then deal with all the existing property of the port on the part of Harbor Island that's north of the existing low bridge. So there's damned if you do, damned if you don't, no matter which way you go. And because of the level of the CBA, we needed to fix things on a certain alignment or pick what we're going to analyze at this level. Keep in mind that when a type, size, and location study gets done for replacement, we're going to go into further detail for all the different possible crossing alignments, whether they be bridge or tunnel.
Okay, so the assumption is that those foundations will have been removed prior to the construction of a tunnel or during the construction of the tunnel, which they also, yeah.
Right, and when I say removed, it could be partial removal, right? We don't want to pay for any more of that than we have to. We'll only go as deep as we need to accommodate a tunnel depth that's required by other factors, like commercial operations in the waterway.
Okay.
Commissioner Fellman, you raised a question asking you, do you want to elaborate on the question you shared saying analysis of construction versus operational impacts need to be broken out?
Yeah, so we have this category that says local business impacts, you know, obviously, and then multimodal. Obviously, we keep on reiterating there's the regional impacts and then the local impacts, but really how those impacts are allocated for the construction phase versus the operational phase, right? So what is the capacity of the new product, whatever it may be, that could be analyzed through the same filter system as could what are the impacts during construction. And so I'm not sure how both of those things are able to go through this contingency concurrently, or whether the same screen has to be done independently for both considerations.
No, I mean, I think that's the purpose of this conversation, is to identify whether or not we are missing attributes or criteria. So perhaps you would want to suggest that we have that the impacts that we have listed, we think of those generally as long-term impacts, but perhaps we want to add an attribute that discusses short-term construction impacts. Maybe that's it.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, these, depending on how long short term is, you know, our ability to lose customers, or even not being able to continue with construction that we're, you know, multi-$100 million into,
right.
It's very pertinent. The quote unquote short term is very, very critical to the port's immediate considerations.
Right. Okay, well, let's make a note then to add construction impacts as an additional attribute, unless somebody has an objection to that, in which case. Yes, Paulina, we would be required to do either an EIS or I forget what EA stands for.
Environmental assessment.
Assessment.
But you know, what I'm just thinking is that I salute you for considering adding an additional category. But like Paulina brings up, you know, there's short-term environmental impacts, and then there are long-term environmental impacts. There are short-term equity challenges and long-term equity challenges. So I'm just almost thinking that I like all those criteria, but there's two separate evaluations to be made utilizing all those criteria. So it almost seems to be the same analysis twice.
So I appreciate what you're saying, Fred, and maybe you'll pardon me if excuse me, Commissioner Felleman, perhaps you will pardon me if I say that when we are entering into a project where we are going to be spending multi-millions of dollars, we tend to focus more on the long-term impacts, because we're going to be living with whatever it is that we select for so many years after. I salute and honor and appreciate that we want to make sure that we are considering the impacts. And so I don't know, you know, somebody should suggest what we want to add, but I feel like adding an attribute that takes into consideration those short-term impacts is totally appropriate. I'm not 100% sure how useful it is to sort of double the number of attributes. I'm not sure if that's going to get us a better product on the back end. So what does everybody think?
I think that we're all absorbing this. That it's going to take us a little bit of time to get comfortable with the concepts that you've laid out. You've laid out a lot, and you've done it well. But I think at least this person needs a little bit of time to absorb what it actually means in real life here.
So if I could just elaborate one moment. So obviously the different choices will have different lengths of time it would take to address those short-term impacts, right? So that duration, the variability in that duration alone could have effects of us being able to complete Terminal 5 or not, which will have enormous long-term impacts. So the length of time of what is short-term, tremendous bearing on ultimately what the final solution is. So, you know, and even if it's a longer term construction, if the final product is, let's say, more efficient, etc., but in that interim, there are mitigations that allow for longer term, you know, access to terminals and things like that. The time unto itself is not the issue. It's the disjointed moment. Yeah, quality of time. That's what we all look for. Anyway, I just and honestly, I just throw out to you how you address the challenge. I don't know. my first blush is it's a separate analysis because there's two different projects really to be analyzed that way. I leave it to your creativity to come up with some way, but urge you to.
Oh no, Commissioner Felleman. Oh no. This is a community-led process. And so while I'm sure everyone would be thrilled to just go with Heather's ideas on all of this, I think it's incumbent upon the members of the task force to make suggestions about what kinds of attributes we want to include. And so if this was just a question of like, leave it to SDOT's creativity, I think we would be having a very different process. That's not what we're doing here. What we're doing is we're really asking for each of you as members of the community task force and representatives of your friends and family and neighbors to really engage in this and own what is written down here, what is listed as an attribute. So you don't have to come up with that today, but I really invite everybody to engage with this material. We can send you a blank spreadsheet so that you can play around with the comparing each attribute to the other, and maybe in the process of doing that, it will fire your imagination as to what other additional criteria you might want to add.
Thank you, Heather. Oh, sorry, Mayor Nichols, please.
I'm just going to say that there's a whole other half of this equation, which is the cost and balancing the cost versus the qualitative analysis that's done here.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Mayor Nichols. And the cost is going to be included, but cost isn't an attribute in this imagination of analysis. And so we would be taking the attributes and the cost for each of those options would also be presented, and that would come together in fullness to be the cost benefit analysis. And that's what we will present to you and to the technical advisory panel, and eventually as a recommendation to the mayor.
Right. Good.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? Maybe I'm misreading this table. It strikes me that that the feasibility and all these things, if this whole table is done per project, if we're comparing these total numbers over here, so is what we're looking at here for, let's just say, a bridge of, and then we look at we screen all those things for one scenario. In that case, so adding just one category for a duration of, whatever disconnectedness, that would be just one parameter for this particular scenario. So there will be potentially a half dozen of these tables that will be produced.
That's exactly right.
Well, I think if I can jump in, this is Sam. Just a couple things to jump in on. I think the idea here is before we get to evaluating the specific impacts or costs and benefits of each of the 6 alternatives, we want to develop the weighting criteria by which we will do that. So this approach will try to take these 10 or however many evaluation criteria we end up with and rate the relative priorities. And like Heather said, we'll do that with the community task force. We'll do that with our technical advisory panel. We'll do that within SDOT and be able to see sort of where and how those different where and how we might be placing different values, because this is really a value system.
Right.
Then for each project, each alternative or scenario, we will be able to evaluate the costs and the relative impacts, and then use that weighting criteria to come up with sort of a final number or range of numbers that inform that cost benefit analysis in total. So once the evaluation rating criteria are set, we don't adjust those for the different scenarios. The scenarios have different relative benefits associated with them, or sort of impacts, effects thereof. I also want to maybe address, and Matt's going to do it, I think, in the chat as well, but just a little bit more on the tunnel and the reason about apples to apples. I don't think we know yet enough to know what the construction type of a tunnel would be. And so we're trying to make some educated assumptions at this point about what, for any of these, sort of what the constructability or sort of how they would be built, what exact construction type we would end up with. And so we need at this scale to like get enough information that we have apples to apples comparison, and at the same time keep moving forward on the type, size, and location work that we've received proposals from consultant firms, and we will that work we'll continue that as fast as we can as well. We don't have people under contract yet, but that is where we'll get into some of those details. So at this point, we're going to have sort of concept level understanding of all these things, and we won't be able to answer all of those questions about this exact type of bridge construction or tunnel construction. We're trying to get a good enough scale, and you could see from the diagrams that Heather was showing, for each of these, we've still got, is it concrete, is it steel, is it this approach, or is it that approach? There's still a lot of variation within these broad scenarios, but we're trying to keep them into some manageable number to be able to assess them apples to apples across all of them.
Okay.
Thank you, Sam. We have just a few moments before we're going to transition to breakout groups, but I do want to just try and lump in a couple of additional questions as they relate to the CBA. First of which, Megan, can you just provide everyone with a reminder for the sort of window of time here for additional feedback?
We actually have a slide where we can talk about that. So why don't we move on to the next slide, which it will be familiar to all of you, our decision tree. And so the cost benefit analysis is the tool that we are going to use to inform our repair versus replace decision. So this is the moment. Next slide, please. So at our next meeting, we are going to hear from the technical advisory panel co-chairs, and we're going to discuss both the repair feasibility and the cost benefit analysis. So you have some time to ponder the list of criteria. We do need to finalize that at a certain point, probably long about August 19th. And so on August 19th, we're going to talk about sort of finalize our cost benefit analysis criteria, have a little bit more discussion about that, and then review the Reconnect West Seattle draft plan. Then September 9th, we're going to see that second part of the cost benefit analysis. Send yourself way back up in the slides to remind yourself about that. And we will present our final Reconnect West Seattle plan. So that is that's how we're going to stage it over the course of the next handful of weeks. And so I encourage everybody to really examine this. And like I said, we'll send out a blank Excel spreadsheet so that you can play together and see how that changes the weighting, because Sam's exactly right. The ultimate goal of that matrix is that final right-hand column that listed the weighting. That's how we're deciding which criteria in the analysis is the most important. So take some time with that. I'm available to you for phone conversations if this is if you need a thought partner on it. I'm a verbal processor, so I always appreciate having someone to talk to about things like this. I think now we're going to turn ourselves to the task force breakout. Paulina?
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Heather, for all that information. As Greg said, it's a lot that we need to be bringing into our brains, a lot of information, and we are just going to take some time to do some reflection together and break into groups. It will be with me, and group B will be with Greg. So you can see in the slides right now who is in what group. And as Bill was putting in the chat, if you haven't received an email, please just follow the link along that is on the chat according to wherever your name is placed on the group assignment. And some of the questions that we will be addressing is from the other presentations. If we have an immediate reaction to it on the Reconnect West Seattle, into this cost-benefit analysis. This would also be good for us to gather additional questions that we can address on the next meetings. I would love to hear more from you, specifically on how do you want to frame the next meetings and the possibilities that we have. As Heather emphasized at the beginning, this is a community-driven process, so we need to follow the voice and the command of community as we're designing the next meeting and the best approach that this will be. Also acknowledging the lots of information received today, and obviously there's a lot of reactions to it, but we need to process and we need to look at it as a group in how to better accommodate this information into our brains and bring it to a meaningful dialogue as we're moving forward. So are we ready to break into the sessions, or unless you want to add something else, Greg?
I was just going to say that part of that second question on how to better accommodate the time that we need to get the information and have a meaningful conversation is a question that Paulina and I have been kicking around, and that is the idea of breaking the group into subcommittees, perhaps subcommittee, and so we'll be able to touch upon that in our groups as well. With that, I think we're ready to light this candle.
Wonderful. Yes. So we're now going to be transitioning into our breakout groups. You can see the breakout groups here.
Yeah.
Plan A is calendar invites with the appropriate link. And if not, you can take it from the chat in here as well as dial in as backup. And then just a reminder, we will not be reconvening after the breakouts. So thank you, everybody, as a holistic group. And then we'll see half of you in our respective breakout groups.
Thanks, everybody, for your time, and see you on the other side.
Thank you.